Title: Whispers from the Old Grove Part 1. In the heart of Louisiana, beneath the heavy boughs of ancient live oaks and the choking embrace of Spanish moss, lies the small town of Breaux Bridge. Known for its rich history and deep-rooted traditions, Breaux Bridge was a community knit tightly by shared secrets and silent understandings. Yet, beneath its serene surface, whispered tales of the old grove west of the town stirred unease in the hearts of locals. The grove was an eerie place, avoided by most. The air felt thicker there, and the sun seldom pierced the dense canopy. Those who dared wander near spoke of a chill that clung to their skin and a quiet so oppressive, it muffled even the heartbeat. It was said that the land was cursed, haunted by the spirit of a woman named Marie Trosclet, who vanished without a trace in the late 1800s. As the story went, Marie was the belle of St. Martin Parish, admired for her beauty and feared for her sharp tongue. One fateful evening, after a heated dispute with a suitor who had scorned her, Marie stormed into the grove and was never seen again. Since then, her presence was felt in the whispers of the wind and in the shadows that seemed to move against the light. The legend of Marie Trosclet was merely a spooky tale for most, told to thrill tourists and mischievous children. However, for Caleb Fontenot, a young and curious history teacher at Breaux Bridge High, the story was a puzzle waiting to be solved. His interest in local lore and his knack for research led him to delve into the archives, seeking truth behind the myth. Caleb's investigation brought him to the old records kept at the parish library. Hours turned into days as he pored over dusty books and faded newspapers. His breakthrough came when he discovered an old diary belonging to Henri Dupont, a contemporary of Marie. The diary revealed a sinister side to the story, suggesting that Marie's disappearance was not voluntary, and hinted at the involvement of prominent townsfolk. With his interest piqued, Caleb decided to visit the grove himself, despite the protests of his grandmother, who was a repository of the town's history. She warned him of the bad spirits that dwelt there, begging him not to stir trouble. But Caleb, driven by the thrill of uncovering hidden truths, could not be swayed. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb drove to the old grove. The moment he stepped into the grove, the air turned cold, and the usual sounds of the countryside, crickets chirping, frogs croaking, were conspicuously absent. He walked deeper into the woods, guided only by the beam of his flashlight and the unsettling feeling that he was not alone. As he ventured further, the ground beneath his feet became soggy, the marsh reclaiming the land. The flashlight flickered as he approached the heart of the grove, where the trees grew so dense that they seemed to consume all light. That's when he heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible over the sound of his own breathing. It was a woman's voice, echoing through the trees, calling out a name he couldn't quite make out. Frozen by fear yet driven by curiosity, Caleb followed the voice deeper into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Suddenly, his flashlight died, plunging him into darkness. Heart pounding, he stood still, listening as the whispers turned into sobs. The air around him grew colder, and he felt a presence just behind him. Too terrified to turn around, he sensed a touch, a hand upon his shoulder, light as a feather yet unmistakably real. The touch sent a shiver down his spine, and he spun around, flashlight flickering back to life in his trembling hand. What he saw in that brief, illuminated moment was a glimpse of a figure draped in white, her face obscured by shadow, her eyes reflecting a sorrow so profound it was palpable. The figure vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Caleb alone with the night and the whispering wind. Heart racing, he stumbled back to his car, the grove now silent behind him. As he drove away, the weight of what he experienced weighed heavily on his mind. Was it his imagination, fueled by the legends and his findings, or had he truly encountered the spirit of Marie Trosclet? Back in his home, Caleb's mind raced with questions. He knew he couldn't let the mystery rest, there was more to uncover, secrets that perhaps were meant to stay hidden. But the truth, as they say, will out. Part 2. After that harrowing night in the grove, Caleb Fontenot found sleep elusive. The image of the spectral woman haunted his dreams, her mournful eyes searing into his soul. As dawn broke over Bro Bridge, the town was silent, shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to mirror Caleb's troubled thoughts. He knew he couldn't ignore what had happened. The mystery of Marie Trosclair called to him, more insistent than ever. Determined to uncover the truth, Caleb spent the next few days buried in historical records and local archives. He revisited Henri Dupont's diary, piecing together the events leading up to Marie's disappearance. The diary entries hinted at a forbidden love affair, a scorned suitor, and a vengeful plot that might have involved some of the town's most respected figures. The more Caleb read, the more he realized that Marie's story was intertwined with dark secrets that had been buried for over a century. One evening, while reviewing maps of the area from the late 1800s, Caleb discovered a reference to an old cabin in the grove, long since forgotten. According to a faded map, the cabin was said to be Marie's secret meeting place with her lover. Excited by this new lead, Caleb planned another visit to the grove, this time to search for any remains of the cabin. Equipped with his flashlight, a camera, and a stronger resolve, Caleb returned to the grove. The air was chilly, carrying the faint echo of the previous visit's whispers. Ignoring the goosebumps on his arms, he ventured deeper into the woods, following the old map's directions. After what felt like hours, Caleb stumbled upon a clearing where the remnants of a cabin lay in decay. The wooden structure was mostly collapsed, its timbers rotting away, enveloped by the relentless grip of nature. As he approached, the atmosphere thickened, the silence punctuated only by the creaking of the old wood and the rustling leaves. Caleb's heart thumped in his chest as he stepped over the threshold of the ruined cabin. The air inside was musty, heavy with the scent of mold and decay. He shone his flashlight around, revealing faded wallpaper peeling from the walls and a broken mirror hanging askew. In the dim light, he noticed something glinting on the floor, an old locket, partially buried in the dust. Kneeling, Caleb picked up the locket and carefully opened it. Inside, a faded photograph of Marie Trosclair stared back at him, her expression somber. As he studied the photo, a cold breeze swept through the cabin, chilling him to the bone. It was then he heard it again, that soft, sorrowful whisper, now a mournful wail that filled the air around him. The voice seemed to come from all directions, enveloping him in a sad melody that tugged at his heart. "Find me," it pleaded, echoing through the broken cabin. Caleb's mind raced, fear and fascination battling within him. He snapped photos of the locket, the cabin, and the surroundings, desperate to document his findings. As he prepared to leave, the temperature dropped sharply, and the whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Do not leave me," the voice cried, so clear and so close that Caleb spun around. There, in the corner of the cabin, stood the figure of Marie, her spectral form more defined than before. Her eyes, full of eternal sadness, met his, and Caleb felt a profound sorrow wash over him. Terrified yet transfixed, he took a step toward her. The floorboards groaned under his weight, and as he moved closer, the apparition began to fade, dissolving into the air like mist. "Help me," she whispered one last time before vanishing completely, leaving Caleb alone with the chilling silence of the grove. Shaken, Caleb hurried back to his car, the sounds of the grove now resuming around him as if nothing had occurred. As he drove away, the weight of the encounter pressed down on him. He knew he couldn't ignore Marie's plea. There was a mystery here, woven into the fabric of Bro Bridge, and he was somehow chosen to unravel it. Back at his house, Caleb spread out his photos and notes, his mind racing with theories and questions. He was Marie's lover. What had happened to her in this grove? And why was her spirit reaching out to him after all these years? Determined to find answers, Caleb resolved to dig deeper into the town's past, unaware that his quest would unearth secrets that some would prefer to remain buried. Little did he know, his investigation would soon put him in the path of dangers far greater than spectral whispers. Part 3. The days following Caleb's second visit to the grove were filled with an eerie sense of foreboding. Each night, as darkness settled over Bow Bridge, the whispers from the grove seemed to follow him home, rustling through the trees near his house, brushing against his windows with ghostly fingers. The town itself felt different to Caleb. The shadows cast by the streetlights seemed darker, the night noises more sinister. Despite the palpable dread that had begun to envelop him, Caleb's resolve only hardened. He spent countless hours at the parish library, delving deeper into the archives, searching for any clue that could shed light on the mystery surrounding Marie Trusclair's fate. His research led him to old property records, wills, and obscure local newspapers that hinted at a scandal so profound, its ripples were still felt in the undercurrents of the town's history. One document, a tattered edition of the St. Martin Gazette from 1896, contained a small, easily overlooked article about a fire that had consumed part of the town. The article mentioned that the fire had started near the grove, around the same time Marie had disappeared. Caleb wondered if the fire was an accident or an act of malice meant to cover up something even more sinister. Armed with this new information, Caleb decided to approach his grandmother, Eloise, who had lived in Bow Bridge her entire life. Her family's roots were deeply entwined with the town's history, and she often shared stories of the old days, though she had always conspicuously avoided the topic of Marie Trusclair. One evening, under the dim light of his grandmother's kitchen, Caleb gently probed her with questions about the past, watching her closely. At the mention of the fire and Marie's name, Eloise's face turned ashen, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea. "Child, why do you stir these old ghosts?" she asked, her voice quivering. "There are things in this town, dark things, best left alone." But Caleb, driven by a need to understand, persisted. "Grandma, please, I need to know. Marie's spirit is restless. She's reaching out to me." Eloise sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Marie was a friend of my grandmother," she began, her voice a whisper. "They were close, like sisters. Marie was involved with a man, Thomas Atcher. He was from one of the town's founding families, a powerful man, married, and dangerous." Her hands clasped tightly around her teacup, Eloise continued, "When Marie vanished, my grandmother always said Thomas was behind it. She believed that Marie was with child and threatened to scandalize Thomas unless he left his wife. It was a scandal that would ruin many lives, not just theirs. The night she disappeared, there was a confrontation. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but she never came home. Then the fire broke out, destroying any evidence. Thomas claimed it was an accident, but..." Eloise trailed off, lost in thought. Caleb listened, his heart pounding with each revelation. "Do you think Thomas killed her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Caleb," Eloise replied, her eyes sad. "But her disappearance broke my grandmother's heart. And Thomas, he was never the same. Guilt eats at a man's soul." Determined to uncover the full story, Caleb thanked his grandmother and left her in peace. He knew what he had to do next. Thomas Atcher's descendants still lived in Bow Bridge, perhaps in the very house where the dark secrets of the past lay buried. The following night, with the crescent moon casting a pale light over the town, Caleb made his way to the Atcher estate, a sprawling old house on the outskirts of town. As he approached, the house loomed large and foreboding, its windows dark, its structure casting long, menacing shadows. Caleb's plan was to seek an audience with the current head of the Atcher family, Richard Atcher, under the guise of discussing local history. What he didn't anticipate was the reception he would receive. As he knocked on the massive oak door, it swung open abruptly, revealing a tall, imposing man in his late 60s. Richard Atcher's eyes were sharp, piercing through the darkness like a hawk. "Mr. Fontenot, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth but cold. "What brings you to my doorstep at this hour?" Caleb, taken aback by the man's knowing tone, gathered his courage. "Mr. Absher, I'm researching Bro Bridge's history, and I believe you might have some insights." Before he could finish, Richard cut him off. "Insights? Or are you looking for ghosts, Mr. Fontenot? Come inside, and let's see what kind of truths you're prepared to handle." Caleb followed Richard into the dimly lit foyer of the Absher estate. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and faint traces of tobacco. Richard led him through a series of elaborately decorated rooms, each filled with antiques and portraits of stern-looking ancestors, until they reached a cozy study lined with books. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. "Sit," Richard commanded, gesturing to a leather chair. Caleb sat, his heart racing as he observed his surroundings. Richard poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Caleb. "Now, tell me, Mr. Fontenot, what exactly are you hoping to unearth?" Caleb took a deep breath, his hand slightly trembling as he accepted the drink. "I'm interested in Marie Trosclair," he said, watching Richard's reaction closely. Richard's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "Marie Trosclair," he repeated softly, almost to himself. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, then set the glass down with a deliberate clink. "A tragic story, that one. A stain on our family's honor." Caleb leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened to her, Mr. Absher?" Richard stared into the fire, his face a mask of remembrance and regret. "Marie was a beautiful, spirited woman, caught in a web of passion and deceit. My great-grandfather, Thomas, was indeed involved with her. It was a relationship doomed from the start." The room seemed to grow colder as Richard continued. "Marie threatened to expose their affair, to ruin Thomas. On the night she disappeared, there was an argument. It took place in the very grove you're so interested in. Did Thomas kill her?" Caleb asked, his voice barely a whisper. Richard sighed heavily, his gaze still fixed on the flames. "The truth is, we don't know. Marie vanished, and no body was ever found. But the guilt, it consumed Thomas. Drove him to madness. He was never the same man again." Caleb's mind raced. This confession was more than he had hoped for, yet it left so many questions unanswered. And the fire? Was it really an accident? "The fire was no accident," Richard confessed, his voice a low growl. "It was intended to destroy evidence. But whether it was set by Thomas or someone else trying to protect him, that remains unknown." The shadows in the room deepened, and the fire's crackling seemed louder in the silence that followed. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine as he considered the implications of Richard's words. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from somewhere in the house, causing both men to startle. Richard stood abruptly. "Stay here," he commanded, and left the room swiftly. Left alone, Caleb's eyes darted around the shadowy room, half expecting to see the ghost of Marie Trosclair materialize before him. The minutes stretched on, and the tension in the air was palpable. Caleb's grip tightened around his glass, his senses heightened to every creak and whisper of the old house. After what felt like an eternity, Richard returned, looking pale and unsettled. "It was nothing," he muttered, more to himself than to Caleb. "Just an old house settling." But Caleb wasn't convinced. The atmosphere had shifted, the house no longer felt merely old, it felt alive, as if it were breathing around them, watching them. "Mr. Absher," Caleb ventured cautiously, "has this house ever been haunted?" Richard looked at him sharply, then laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Haunted? Mr. Fontenot, in Louisiana, the dead are never quite as far from us as we might wish." Caleb shivered, feeling the weight of the house's history pressing in on him. He knew he was close to something, a secret that was guarded by both the living and the dead. As the clock struck midnight, the wind outside rose to a howl, and the house creaked ominously. Richard stood, indicating that the meeting was over. "You should leave now, Mr. Fontenot." And be careful. Some truths are dangerous, and the path you're on is dark and fraught with peril. Caleb left the house with more questions than answers, the chilling words of Richard Apsher echoing in his mind. As he drove away, the moonlight cast long shadows across the road, and a cold wind whipped through the trees, as if warning him of the storm that was yet to come. Part 4. The drive back from the Apsher estate was shrouded in a palpable darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Caleb's mind churned with the revelations shared by Richard, each piece of the puzzle adding weight to the spectral mystery that seemed to grow more tangible with each passing moment. As the road wound through the dense Louisiana landscape, the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches scratching at the car like skeletal fingers. Back at his house, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He tried to focus on organizing his notes and research, but every creak and groan of the old house set his nerves on edge. The shadows seemed to flicker unnaturally in the corners of his vision, and the air felt charged with a silent, waiting energy. Determined to push through his fear, Caleb set up a digital recorder in his study, hoping to capture any unexplained noises or whispers that might offer clues. As the night deepened, a storm began to brew outside, the wind howling through the eaves as lightning illuminated the sky with sudden flashes. Seated at his desk, Caleb pored over old family trees and maps, trying to piece together the connections that might explain why Marie's spirit had reached out to him. As he delved deeper into the history of the Apsher family, he found several instances of untimely deaths and tragic accidents that seemed more than coincidental. His concentration was suddenly broken by a loud thump from the hallway outside his study. Heart pounding, Caleb stood and opened the door, peering into the dimly lit corridor. Their house was silent now, save for the storm raging outside. Steeling himself, he stepped out of the study and walked down the hall, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. As he passed by the old grandfather clock in the hall, it began to chime midnight, the sound echoing eerily in the empty house. At the end of the hallway, the door to the attic was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it moved in the draft. Caleb hadn't been up there in months. Swallowing his fear, he approached the door and pushed it open, the hinges squealing in protest. The attic was musty and cluttered with boxes and old furniture covered in dust sheets. Caleb's flashlight flickered as he moved deeper into the room, the beam of light casting strange shadows that seemed to shift and twist around him. Suddenly, the air grew icy cold, and he could see his breath fogging in the beam of his flashlight. Whispers filled the room, soft and indistinct, rising above the storm outside. Caleb spun around, trying to locate the source of the sounds, his heart racing. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice cracking in the silence. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if responding to his presence. Caleb strained to understand, catching fragments of sentences that seemed to speak of secrets and hidden truths. He realized, with a chilling clarity, that these whispers were not coming from the attic itself, but from the recorder he had left running in his study. Rushing back downstairs, Caleb retrieved the recorder, his hands shaking as he hit the playback button. The room filled with the sound of his own earlier movements, followed by the eerie whispers he had just heard. Amongst the garbled words, one phrase was clear, repeated several times with desperate clarity: "Find the truth." The message was unmistakable. Caleb knew he had to return to the grove, to the site of the old cabin where he had first felt Marie's presence so strongly. He needed to uncover what was buried there, literally or metaphorically, that kept her spirit from resting. As dawn approached, the storm abated, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Caleb packed his tools, a shovel, his camera, the digital recorder, and set out for the grove once again. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to watch him as he made his way to the clearing where the cabin ruins lay. He began to dig near where he had found the locket, the ground soft and muddy from the night's rain. Each shovelful of earth seemed to resonate with a sense of impending revelation or doom. Caleb worked tirelessly, driven by a mix of fear and anticipation. Hours passed, and just as Caleb was beginning to despair, his shovel struck something hard. Clearing the mud away, he uncovered the edge of a small, metal box, rusted by time. Heart in his throat, Caleb carefully excavated the box and pried it open. Inside, protected by the tightly sealed container, were several old letters and a journal, the ink faded but still legible. Caleb's hands trembled as he began to read, the words revealing the depths of the tragedy that had unfolded over a century ago. But the truth was more complex and more horrifying than he could have imagined, entwining the fates of the Trosglea and Abshire families in ways that Caleb had never anticipated. The letters were written by Marie Trosglea herself, addressed to her confidant and secret sister-in-arms, Eloise's grandmother. In them, Marie detailed her tumultuous affair with Thomas Abshire, her pregnancy, and her fears for the future. The most disturbing revelations, however, came from Marie's journal. It chronicled the final days before her disappearance, describing a sinister plot not just by Thomas, but involving other prominent members of the community who sought to protect the Abshire family's reputation at any cost. As Caleb pored over Marie's writings, the gravity of his discoveries sent chills down his spine. The journal ended abruptly, with Marie's last entry expressing hope that she could escape Bro Bridge with her unborn child and start anew. But the letters and the journal together painted a grim picture of betrayal and desperation that likely led to her untimely demise. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Caleb knew what he had to do next. He carefully gathered the letters and the journal, placing them back into the metal box to protect them from the elements. He reburied the box, marking the spot with a small, unobtrusive stone. It wasn't yet time to reveal these secrets to the world. First, he needed to confront the current head of the Abshire family, Richard, with these revelations. The return journey to the Abshire estate was fraught with tension. As Caleb drove, the skies darkened ominously, as if mirroring the storm brewing in his own heart. When he arrived, he found the estate eerily quiet, the sprawling gardens desolate, and the house itself seemed to loom larger and more menacing than before. Richard Abshire greeted him in the foyer, his demeanor frosty. "Back again, Mr. Fontenot. To what do I owe this displeasure?" Caleb did not mince words. "I know about Marie and the role your family played in her disappearance," he said, holding Richard's gaze. "I found her journal and letters. I know she was pregnant and threatened to expose the truth." The color drained from Richard's face, and for a moment, he seemed to age 10 years. He slumped into a chair, his aristocratic poise crumbling. "So, it's all out then," he sighed, a trace of defeat in his voice. "What do you intend to do?" "I want the truth to be known," Caleb replied firmly. "But I want to understand, why keep this secret for so long?" Richard looked out the window, his eyes distant. "Fear," he admitted. "Fear of scandal, of losing everything. But it's not just my family who wanted the past buried. This town, it protects its own, sometimes to a fault." Caleb nodded, understanding the complex web of loyalty and silence that had ensnared the town for generations. "It's time for the truth to come out," he said. "But it needs to be done carefully, to honor all those affected." Richard agreed reluctantly. "I'll cooperate," he said. "For the sake of closure, if nothing else." As Caleb left the Abshire estate, the clouds began to part, and a sliver of sunlight broke through, casting long, stark shadows across the landscape. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but he also knew that the road ahead would be difficult. Revealing the truth about Marie's fate would stir up old ghosts and perhaps awaken new ones. Yet, as he drove back into the heart of Bro Bridge, Caleb felt a resolve solidify within him. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the truth and a determination to set the record straight. Marie's voice, once silenced by fear and betrayal, would finally be heard. But the story doesn't end here. The revelations about Marie Trosglea are just the beginning of a larger journey, one that will delve deeper into the shadows of Bro Bridge and perhaps reveal even more about the secrets that small towns can hold. As the community braces for the impact of these truths, other stories wait to be told, and other mysteries wait to be unraveled. As Caleb prepared to bring Marie Trosclair's story into the light, the town of Bro Bridge braced itself for the revelations that were sure to shake its very foundations. He organized a town meeting in the old community hall, inviting everyone who had a stake in the history and future of the town. The room filled quickly, buzzing with anticipation and apprehension. When Caleb stood to speak, he felt the weight of the gathered eyes upon him. He cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the hushed room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are here tonight not just to reveal a secret buried over a century ago, but to learn from it, to bring justice and peace to a soul wronged by our ancestors." He recounted the story of Marie Trosclair, her affair with Thomas Absher, and the conspiracy that likely led to her disappearance. He spoke of the journal and letters he had found, the undeniable proof of a life cut tragically short. The room was silent, save for the creaking of old wood and the soft murmur of the wind outside, a mournful backdrop to the somber tale. When Caleb finished, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then an elderly woman stood up. It was Eloise, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Caleb, for bringing Marie's voice back to us," she said, her voice trembling. "It's time for us to face our past and give her the dignity she was denied." The meeting ended with a collective resolve to honor Marie's memory. A memorial would be placed in the grove, and her story would be included in the town's historical records, never again to be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, Caleb visited the grove often. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep crimson, he felt a presence beside him. Turning, he half expected to see Marie's apparition, but there was only the rustling of the leaves and the soft whisper of the wind. Yet, as he stood there, a sense of peace enveloped him. The whispers of the past seemed to quiet, and the chill that had once permeated the grove lifted. It was as if Marie had found her rest, her story told, her memory honored. Caleb left the grove with a light heart, ready to move forward. But as he glanced back one last time, he thought he saw a figure standing by the new memorial, a woman in white, her expression serene. Blinking, he looked again, but the figure was gone, only the fading light and the quiet grove remained. As Caleb walked away, the grove behind him was silent, but it was a silence of resolution and tranquility. Marie Trosclair's spirit, once restless and whispering through the trees, was now at peace. And Bro Bridge, a town once shadowed by secrets, could finally look towards a lighter, more truthful future. And so, as the moon rose high over the quiet town, casting its silver light across the grove and the rippling waters of the bayou, the story of Marie Trosclair concluded, a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption, forever woven into the tapestry of Bro Bridge.